Chapter 249 to 254. From the seal, Kuroto has learned that there are two different approaches to using the transcription seal, and each approach has a certain difference in the result. The first approach is the same as when Itachi sealed Amaterasu in Sasuke's Sharingan or when he programmed Shirsui's Manjikyu to activate Kotoama Tsukumi when it encounters Itachi's Manjikyu Sharingan. In this method the seal would only work once, and then the programming will disappear. The other approach is to transfer a part of your visual prowess, but here's the catch: when you transfer a part of your visual prowess, then part of your visual prowess will be separated from you and will be sealed at the target, and when that part of visual prowess is separated from you, your visual prowess will decrease by that exact same amount, although it can be recovered at a later date. Until it's recovered, the user's visual prowess will remain decreased. One of the advantages of this approach is that it works the same, but there wouldn't be just one use. So long as the chakra supply is there, the programming will keep working. But there is another limitation with the second approach. For this approach to work, the user has to be alive. If the user dies, then the programming will also disappear, which is not a limitation for the first approach, in which the transcription seal will work exactly as it was programmed even if the programmer dies. Both approaches have their advantages and limitations, and it depends upon the user's needs, which one suits his needs. For Kuroto, the second approach is more suitable, as such he is going to try the second approach. PS, for convenience's sake, we are going to call them Transcription Seal 1 and Transcription Seal 2 respectively. To do so, Kuroto took out the Suijin clone from the nutrition tank and placed it on the test bench. After making sure that the clone was in perfect condition, Kuroto was ready to use the Transcription Seal 2. Closing his eyes, Kuroto urged the visual prowess of his Tenseigan and then suddenly opened his eyes. The next thing he did was to gently touch the forehead of Suijin clone with his index finger. Instantly the seal was activated and Kuroto was able to feel a part of his Tenseigan visual prowess separating from him and being sealed in the semi-finished Byakugan of the Suijin clone. After the seal was completed, Kuroto could feel that his insight has dropped a little compared to before. And that was not all. Since he did not use Ryumyaku chakra while using the seal, Kuroto also felt that a fourth of his chakra was also emptied instantly, which led to a momentary sluggishness, and Kuroto had to take the support of the test bench to stabilize his figure in order to not fall, because his legs were a bit softened. It turns out that the burden of using transcription seal is so heavy. No wonder only a few individuals of the Uchiha clan are known to have used this technique, and it instantly resulted in Itachi's death as soon as he sealed Amaterasu in Sasuke's Sharingan. Even without the use of Ryumyaku, Kuroto can certainly say that his chakra reserves have grown very high over the years, although not to the exaggerated level of Senju Hashirama or Uchiha Madara. It wouldn't be wrong to say that his chakra has far surpassed the chakra reserves of the legendary Sannin, which in itself says that his chakra reserves are also huge. And even then, a quarter of his chakra was consumed in using this. Just goes to show just how taxing transcription seal is. Kuroto soon stabilized his situation, and after putting away his thoughts he walked towards the test bench to see what changes have occurred in it. After a while of observation, Kuroto frowned, as he found that there seems to be no significant change in the Suijin clone on the first observation. Did it not work? Kuroto was a bit confused. To confirm his doubt, he activated the Tenseigan and again carefully observed the Suijin clone. "Ah, that's a bit interesting, I guess?" Kuroto muttered with an intriguing look. This is because, in his Tenseigan vision, Kuroto was able to notice an imperceptible chakra reaction inside the right eye of the Suijin clone lying on the test bench, but this chakra reaction was too subtle, and if it wasn't for his Tenseigan, Kuroto is sure that he would have been unable to notice it. And this is the exact reason why Kuroto found this turn of events to be a bit interesting. Almost a quarter of Kuroto's chakra was transferred while using the transcription seal, and yet he only perceives a very imperceptible chakra reaction from the Suijin clone. Does that mean that most of the chakra was lost? Not really. The chakra is not lost, and it has perfectly taken root inside that Byakugan as per Kuroto's programming. Then why the subtle chakra reaction? It just means that perceiving the chakra sealed using the transcription seal is very difficult and needs extreme insight. Since the seal was successful, Kuroto needs to see what is the exact difference between the previous and current state. After all, a part of rain will interaction power, which is one of the many techniques that the Tenseigan has to offer, has been sealed inside the Suijin clone, so Kuroto has to also understand these changes that this transfer of some of his visual prowess leads to. So, to be able to do so, Kuroto turned around and reached out his hand towards a large cabinet in the corner of the lab. Rain will pull. Voila. Instantly, the cabinet was pulled towards Kuroto under the effects of an attractive force. After confirming what he wanted, Kuroto used Rain Will Push, to push back the cabinet to its initial position and thought to himself, sure enough, there is some decrease in the amount of force that I am able to exert using rain-will interaction with the same amount of chakra consumption. After confirming this, Kuroto understood that the transcription seal, too, cannot be abused. Because each time the seal is used, the caster's visual prowess will decrease, which is a risky thing, therefore it is better to only use the transcription seal, too, when extremely necessary. With that confirmation and understanding, Kuroto sat on the chair and used the Tenseigan soul descend to transfer his soul into the Suijin clone body. As Kuroto closed his eyes, Suijin clone's eyes opened, and he sat up. Suijin clone has already been used by Kuroto several times, as such, this time Kuroto did not feel even a bit of sluggishness and he was in perfect sync with the clone body. After spending a while getting used to the different body, Suijin jumped off the test bench swiftly and tried to use the rain-will interaction which has been sealed inside this body by Kuroto using the transcription seal too. I feel it, the transcription seal too has indeed worked and something is sealed in the right Byakugan of this body. To see the effects that this sealed ability will have, Suijin stretched out his hand towards the same cabinet and urged his chakra. Rain will pull. Voila. Just as intended, the cabinet was pulled towards Suijin under the traction force of rain will pull. Then he used rain will push to push back the cabinet into its previous position. After confirming that transcription seal 2 was indeed working, Suijin thought, although the effect of the rain will interaction is 20% weakened, there is no doubt that transcription seal is working perfectly as intended. With this guess confirmed, he did not stay in the Suijin body any longer and used Tenseigan soul descend to transfer his soul back to the main body, and also withdrew back the chakra he sealed inside Suijin's Byakugan. Although this method seems to be very useful, Kuroto does not intend to divide his strength. Despite all of its shortcoming, the transcription seal is really amazing, whether type 1 or type 2, both of them have their uses and will be very useful. Prior to this, Kuroto was always doubtful that how come Uchiha Madara managed to fool Shodame-sama and Naidame-sama. After all, if there is Izanagi pre-programmed in his Sharingan, there should have been some chakra reaction. And it must be known that the perception abilities of Shodame-sama and Naidame-sama are obviously extremely good, as long as there is even a bit of chakra reaction in Madara's body both of them would have easily discovered that something is wrong. But they did not, and Uchiha Madara fooled them with Izanagi. They were unable to notice because the chakra reaction of the transcription seal is extremely subtle. Even Obito suffered from Itachi's Amaterasu because of this, otherwise, how come Obito did not notice that there was Itachi's chakra present in Sasuke's Sharingan? It is obviously because the chakra reaction of the transcription seal is imperceptible. Understanding this, Kuroto can't help but think that how so many amazing techniques have been held in the Uchiha clan, Izanami, Izanagi, and the transcription seal are some of the few techniques that Kuroto knows. This does imply that these are the only techniques. The destruction of such a clan is a huge loss for the world of shinobi. From Kuroto's perspective, whether as a shinobi or as a scientific researcher, the Uchiha clan is just too valuable to be allowed to be destroyed. Therefore, even if not for the promise he made to Shisui, Kuroto would not allow the Uchiha clan to disappear. All that aside, now Kuroto has confirmed that he can use the transcription seal too, so he can now begin the fusion process of the two Manjikyu Sharingan pairs into the eternal Manjikyu Sharingan pair. Of course, before the process begins, he first needs to seal Uchiha Hideki's Manjikyu Sharingan technique Daikokutten into Ryota's right eye with the transcription seal. To seal Daikokutten into Uchiha Ryota's right eye with the help of the transcription seal, Kuroto must first transplant Uchiha Hideki's Manjikyu Sharingan. Kuroto would obviously not risk removing the Tenseigan from his main body, and since there are no other clones aside from Suijin clone currently, so Suijin clone is the only option he has to use for the fusion process of the two Manjikyu Sharingan pairs. Using the surgical instruments, Kuroto carefully removed the semi-finished Byakugan from the eye sockets of Suijin clone. In the future, when he is going to use the Suijin clone for the ritual to achieve Kekkei Mora through the Chimera technique, there must be no defects in his main body or any of the clones. Even the eyes and the eye sockets of the clone will also be the same semi-finished Byakugan. Therefore, this pair of semi-finished Byakugan must not be lost or destroyed, otherwise, the whole clone he has cultivated up to now will become useless. Therefore, Kuroto carefully sealed the semi-finished Byakugan in the preservation solution and then transplanted Hideki's Manjikyu Sharingan in the eye sockets of Suijin clone. Next, Kuroto brought out Uchiha Ryota's body that was in a temporary stasis and reinstalled his Manjikyu Sharingan into his eye sockets. With that done, the initial preparations were completed, and the next thing he has to do is to use the transcription seal, too. For this purpose, Kuroto again used the Tenseigan soul descend to transfer his soul into the Suijin clone. Coming to the test bench where Uchiha Ryota laid unconscious, Suijin activated the Manjikyu Sharingan. Then after completing all the preparation, Suijin used his index finger and gently tapped Uchiha Ryota's forehead. As soon as the action was performed, the transcription seal activated and Hideki's Manjikyu technique Daikoken was sealed into Ryota's right Manjikyu Sharingan. The moment the transcription seal was completed, Suijin felt a sudden weakness. Ha! 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 Leaning against the wall, Suijin panted for a while to ease his breathing. Using this clone body to cast the transcription seal is quite difficult. When Kuroto used his main body to cast the transcription seal from Tenseigan, he only felt a momentary weakness, but this time, he used Suijin clone to cast the transcription seal from the transplanted Manjikyu Sharingan, so he had to bear more pressure. Fortunately, the transcription seal only needed to be used once, otherwise this clone would have been damaged due to bearing excessive pressure. Suijin muttered while shaking his head slightly. After recovering, he tried to perceive the transcription seal, and as he expected, there was nothing he could perceive from Ryota's right eye, so changing his approach, Suijin tried to check his eyes and found that Daikoken was exhausted from his eyes. The reason why it was lost was that he transferred it completely. Confirming his guess, Suijin muttered, "I just hope that my guess is right." The reason for going to so much trouble is to ensure that the eternal Manjikyu Sharingan that will be obtained after the fusion of two pairs of Manjikyu Sharingan can have Daikoken in the right eye and Yaoyorozu in the left eye. However, this will only happen if his assumption that transcription seal will have some influence is correct, otherwise, the eternal Manjikyu Sharingan will not have Daikoken, instead, it will have Okyunenoshi, which is the original dojutsu that Ryota awakened. After completing the second step, now only the final step is to implant both Manjikyu Sharingan so as to initiate their fusion into the eternal Manjikyu Sharingan pair. To do this, he used the Tenseigan soul descend and transferred back his soul to the main body. The next was to place the Suijin clone on the test bench and remove Hideki's Manjikyu Sharingan pair from the eye sockets and replace the semi-finished Byakugan pair back to the eye sockets it belonged to. With that done, Kuroto took the removed Manjikyu Sharingan pair and walked to the other test bench on which Uchiha Ryota was lying. The reason Kuroto did not kill Hideki and Ryota was that he knew that later on, he would need them to fuse the two pairs of Manjikyu Sharingan into the eternal Manjikyu Sharingan. Because the fusion process requires that either one of the owners of the Manjikyu acts as the host body to initiate and carry out the fusion process, the reason is obviously to provide a continuous and stable chakra supply. As for who to choose as host, this decision entirely depends on Kuroto. And since Kuroto has chosen Ryota's Manjikyu Sharingan pair as the base because of the Manjikyu techniques, therefore, Kuroto is obviously going to choose Ryota to be the host. Coming to the side of the test bench on which Ryota was kept, Kuroto reconfirmed that all the seals that he has cast on him were working, as well as all his indicators were normal, and since everything was right, exactly as it should be, Kuroto took a deep breath and started the final step to the fusion. The fusion of two pairs of Manjikyu Sharingan into the eternal Manjikyu Sharingan happens when one pair completely swallows the visual prowess of the other pair. Therefore, the surgery for fusion is actually transplanting, not the correct term to what is referred to here, Hideki's Manjikyu Sharingan into Ryota's eye sockets, who already has his pair of Manjikyu Sharingan in his eye sockets. In short, Ryota's eye sockets will hold two pairs of Manjikyu Sharingan one over another, at the same time. And this is also the reason why the pattern of eternal Manjikyu Sharingan is a combination of both pairs of Manjikyu Sharingan. The space in the eye sockets is obviously limited, and the area that connects the optic nerve is extremely delicate, so it is actually very difficult to accommodate two eyeballs in one eye orbit at the same time. Even a small mistake will not only damage the orbits, especially the nerves, it will also damage the Manjikyu Sharingan pair, which will directly lead to the failure of the fusion process, so even Kuroto, who already has rich experience in transplanting eyeballs, will have to be extremely careful when carrying out this overly complicated operation. After opening Ryota's eyelids with the help of the surgical instruments, Kuroto started the operation to transplant the left eye. Human eye sockets are surrounded by soft tissues, and the eyeballs are also made up of soft tissues. As such, it is not impossible to squeeze it to accommodate two eyeballs within the eye socket. What's important is to ensure that neither the eye orbits nor the eyeballs are damaged during the transplantation process. The difficulty of this operation is so high that it took Kuroto 1 whole hour to transplant the left eye alone. After the left eye was transplanted, Kuroto breathed in relief and wiped away the sweat from his forehead. The transplantation of the left eye was successful without any rejection. After drinking some water and a 5-minute break, Kuroto again started the transplantation operation, this time for the right eye. Similar to the left eye, the right eye was also transplanted smoothly without any rejection. With this, the transplantation operation is completed, and Kuroto wrapped Ryota's eyes with an antibacterial cloth that will also keep the eyes moist. Kuroto does not know how long it took Uchiha Madara to fuse the two Manjikyu Sharingan into Eternal Manjikyu Sharingan pair, but he does remember it very vaguely that it took Sasuke a few days to completely merge the two Manjikyu Sharingan pair into the Eternal Manjikyu Sharingan. And considering the fact that Ryota is and will stay unconscious, the time required for fusion may in fact be longer than Sasuke. To seal Daikokunin into Uchiha Ryota's right eye with the help of the transcription seal, Kuroto must first transplant Uchiha Hideki's Manjikyu Sharingan. Kuroto would obviously not risk removing the Tenseigan from his main body, and since there are no other clones aside from Suijin clone currently, so Suijin clone is the only option he has to use for the fusion process of the two Manjikyu Sharingan pairs. Using the surgical instruments, Kuroto carefully removed the semi-finished Byakugan from the eye sockets of Suijin clone. In the future, when he is going to use the Suijin clone for the ritual to achieve Kekkei Mora through the Chimera technique, there must be no defects in his main body or any of the clones. Even the eyes and the eye sockets of the clone will also be the same semi-finished Byakugan. Therefore, this pair of semi-finished Byakugan must not be lost or destroyed, otherwise, the whole clone he has cultivated up to now will become useless. Therefore, Kuroto carefully sealed the semi-finished Byakugan in the preservation solution and then transplanted Hideki's Manjikyu Sharingan in the eye sockets of Suijin clone. Next, Kuroto brought out Uchiha Ryota's body that was in a temporary stasis and reinstalled his Manjikyu Sharingan into his eye sockets. With that done, the initial preparations were completed, and the next thing he has to do is to use the transcription seal, too. For this purpose, Kuroto again used the Tenseigan Soul Descend to transfer his soul into the Suijin clone. Coming to the test bench where Uchiha Ryota laid unconscious, Suijin activated the Manjikyu Sharingan. Then after completing all the preparation, Suijin used his index finger and gently tapped Uchiha Ryota's forehead. As soon as the action was performed, the transcription seal activated and Hideki's Manjikyu technique Daikokunin was sealed into Ryota's right Manjikyu Sharingan. The moment the transcription seal was completed, Suijin felt a sudden weakness. Ha! 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 Leaning against the wall, Suijin panted for a while to ease his breathing. Using this clone body to cast the transcription seal is quite difficult. When Kuroto used his main body to cast the transcription seal from Tenseigan, he only felt a momentary weakness, but this time, he used Suijin clone to cast the transcription seal from the transplanted Manjikyu Sharingan, so he had to bear more pressure. Fortunately, the transcription seal only needed to be used once, otherwise this clone would have been damaged due to bearing excessive pressure. Suijin muttered while shaking his head slightly. After recovering, he tried to perceive the transcription seal, and as he expected, there was nothing he could perceive from Ryota's right eye, so changing his approach, Suijin tried to check his eyes and found that Daikokunin was exhausted from his eyes. The reason why it was lost was that he transferred it completely. Confirming his guess, Suijin muttered, "I just hope that my guess is right." The reason for going to so much trouble is to ensure that the Eternal Manjikyu Sharingan that will be obtained after the fusion of two pairs of Manjikyu Sharingan can have Daikokunin in the right eye and Yaoyorozu in the left eye. However, this will only happen if his assumption that transcription seal will have some influence is correct, otherwise, the Eternal Manjikyu Sharingan will not have Daikokunin. Instead, it will have Okyuninoshi, which is the original dojutsu that Ryota awakened. After completing the second step, now only the final step is to implant both Manjikyu Sharingan so as to initiate their fusion into the Eternal Manjikyu Sharingan pair. To do this, he used the Tenseigan Soul Descend and transferred back his soul to the main body. The next was to place the Suijin clone on the test bench and remove Hideki's Manjikyu Sharingan pair from the eye sockets and replace the semi-finished Byakugan pair back to the eye sockets it belonged to. With that done, Kuroto took the removed Manjikyu Sharingan pair and walked to the other test bench on which Uchiha Ryota was lying. The reason Kuroto did not kill Hideki and Ryota was that he knew that later on, he would need them to fuse the two pairs of Manjikyu Sharingan into the Eternal Manjikyu Sharingan. Because the fusion process requires that either one of the owners of the Manjikyu acts as the host body to initiate and carry out the fusion process, the reason is obviously to provide a continuous and stable chakra supply. As for who to choose as host, this decision entirely depends on Kuroto. And since Kuroto has chosen Ryota's Manjikyu Sharingan pair as the base because of the Manjikyu techniques, therefore, Kuroto is obviously going to choose Ryota to be the host. Coming to the side of the test bench on which Ryota was kept, Kuroto reconfirmed that all the seals that he has cast on him were working, as well as all his indicators were normal, and since everything was right, exactly as it should be, Kuroto took a deep breath and started the final step to the fusion. The fusion of two pairs of Manjikyu Sharingan into the eternal Manjikyu Sharingan happens when one pair completely swallows the visual prowess of the other pair. Therefore, the surgery for fusion is actually transplanting, not the correct term to what is referred to here, Hideki's Manjikyu Sharingan into Ryota's eye sockets, who already has his pair of Manjikyu Sharingan in his eye sockets. In short, Ryota's eye sockets will hold two pairs of Manjikyu Sharingan one over another, at the same time. And this is also the reason why the pattern of eternal Manjikyu Sharingan is a combination of both pairs of Manjikyu Sharingan. The space in the eye sockets is obviously limited, and the area that connects the optic nerve is extremely delicate, so it is actually very difficult to accommodate two eyeballs in one eye orbit at the same time. Even a small mistake will not only damage the orbits, especially the nerves, it will also damage the Manjikyu Sharingan pair, which will directly lead to the failure of the fusion process, so even Kuroto, who already has rich experience in transplanting eyeballs, will have to be extremely careful when carrying out this overly complicated operation. After opening Ryota's eyelids with the help of the surgical instruments, Kuroto started the operation to transplant the left eye. Human eye sockets are surrounded by soft tissues, and the eyeballs are also made up of soft tissues. As such, it is not impossible to squeeze it to accommodate two eyeballs within the eye socket. What's important is to ensure that neither the eye orbits nor the eyeballs are damaged during the transplantation process. The difficulty of this operation is so high that it took Kuroto 1 whole hour to transplant the left eye alone. After the left eye was transplanted, Kuroto breathed in relief and wiped away the sweat from his forehead. The transplantation of the left eye was successful without any rejection. After drinking some water and a 5-minute break, Kuroto again started the transplantation operation, this time for the right eye. Similar to the left eye, the right eye was also transplanted smoothly without any rejection. With this, the transplantation operation is completed, and Kuroto wrapped Ryota's eyes with an antibacterial cloth that will also keep the eyes moist. Kuroto does not know how long it took Uchiha Madara to fuse the two Manjikyu Sharingan into eternal Manjikyu Sharingan pair, but he does remember it very vaguely that it took Sasuke a few days to completely merge the two Manjikyu Sharingan pair into the eternal Manjikyu Sharingan. And considering the fact that Ryota is and will stay unconscious, the time required for fusion may in fact be longer than Sasuke. Land of Rain. While Hyuga Kuroto was busy carrying out various experiments for the cultivation of fire nature clone, Hirako, a Konohagakure missing nin, was also conducting various experiments in his laboratory in the Land of Rain. Ah! Suddenly, a loud screaming and wailing sound echoed in his laboratory. On the test bench, a certain man's body was constantly swelling into various blobs of huge sarcomas that glowed with purple light. The number of these blobs was quite a lot, giving the man a distorted and disgusting appearance. But, Hirako, who stood at the side, did not detest this, and in fact, had a happy and ecstatic look. His eyes clearly dictated that he was very excited by observing the changes that the man went through. At this moment, the wailing and screaming of the man on the test bench gradually subsided. The huge blobs of sarcomas that stood out of his body also shrank back one after another, as if they were never even there a few moments ago. Boom. Then suddenly, the man's body that had just recovered suddenly burst from inside, splattering blood, gore, meat, and bones all over the laboratory. Splashed with blood and gore all over his body, Hirako was not only not angry, but in fact, had his lips curved into an evil grin. Heh, dark medical ninjutsu turns out to be more useful than I thought. In the original story, in the same time period, Hirako had to constantly avoid being noticed by Konoha's Umbu and therefore had to change his hiding place from time to time, and had to work in extreme secrecy. Moreover, he was also busy with the matter of funding for his big project, so the development of Chimera Jutsu was very slow, almost close to a standstill. But that's not the case here. After being forced to join Akatsuki organization, Hirako no longer fears being discovered by Konohagakure, and also has support from the Akatsuki organization in terms of funds. Moreover, he also has Shino's assistance, who is extremely proficient in human physiology, has remarkable medical knowledge, and is also a master of various regeneration techniques. There is also Yomi, who is a master of dark medical ninjutsu. So, having to not work in so secrecy, access to proper funding's courtesy to Akatsuki, coupled with the advice and assistance from Shino and Yomi, Hirako was able to speed up the development of the Chimera technique by many times and has now made a major breakthrough in it. Hirako walked out of the laboratory while wiping away the blood and gore on his body. In another room, Shino was discussing some of his ideas about artificial bijou with Yomi. Similar to Hirako, joining Akatsuki has been quite beneficial for him, as his Reibi project has also proceeded very smoothly. At present, there are only a few technical difficulties he has to solve to become a perfect Jinchuriki of Reibi. Seeing that Hirako walked out of his experimental laboratory, Shino immediately stopped his discussion with Yomi, and asked eagerly from Hirako, "How was it, did you succeed?" Hirako threw the bloodstained towel to the trash can and spoke, "The initial phase was a complete success, but the body of the test subjects are too fragile to be able to bear the burden of holding in the chimera buds." Shino was a little disappointed and sat back with a dispirited look. If Hirako's experiment had succeeded, Shino would have also started his Reibi project, because all those technical difficulties would have been solved more or less. Hirako did not care about Shino's downcast look and spoke with a Cheshire grin, "But dark medical ninjutsu was indeed more useful than I thought. If the core of the subject that will take in the chimera buds is strong enough, then the probability of success would be as high as 95%. Yomi laughed immediately, "I am happy that dark medical ninjutsu is useful." After being saved by Hirako and Shino, Yomi also joined Akatsuki, but in terms of rank, he is Hirako and Shino's subordinate, so his authority is not much. As such, Yomi has to always maintain a polite and careful tone when talking to them. "Really, 95%? Shino exclaimed when he heard the words again, and said, "If that's the case, then that means we can start to implement both of our plans, right?" Hirako tried to suppress the excitement in his heart, but it was difficult to suppress it while he nodded to Shino's question. After his recent breakthrough in the study of the Chimera technique, Hirako is confident in the success of his plan, and therefore, he can officially commence the Kekkei Genkai stealing plan. He has been making preparation for this moment for so long. Now all that he lacks are the Kekkei Genkai users that he is going to absorb inside him to become the perfect ninja. And Hirako knows that with the power of Akatsuki, gathering all those targets will be very easy. Soon, Hirako came to the tallest tower of Amagakure, the place from where the god of this land watches over the people of this nation. Under the leadership of Angel Sama, he was allowed to meet Lord Pain, the savior of this world and the leader of the Akatsuki organization. For a moment Hirako looked at the pair of Rinnegan, the eye with the purple ripple pattern, then looked away immediately and said, "Leader, my experiment has reached a critical juncture, and I believe that I am extremely close to success. To finally complete the project I need help from organization." Tendo Pain had an indifferent look as if he was not interested but still chose to humor himself. "What do you need from the organization?" he questioned in a deep voice. Hirako immediately said, I need the organization's help to gather few ninjas with selective Kekkei Genkai so that I can finally start the preparation for the ritual." Angel on the side spoke, "Gathering shinobi with Kekkei Genkai wouldn't be an easy thing." Hirako nodded slightly, "I understand that well enough. I have already marked all of them with my puppet curse a few years ago, but gathering them will take a lot of time and will, therefore, attract the attention of other shinobi villages, and precisely why I need organization's help. I believe that with the power of the organization, it should be easy to capture them in the shortest amount of time possible." Pain questioned, "Who are the shinobi you have selected, and what are the Kekkei Genkai they have?" Hirako immediately answered, "The shinobi I have selected belong to the 5 great nations, and the Kekkei Genkai they possess are Swift Release, Steel Release, Dark Release, Storm Release, and Sharingan of the Uchiha clan from Konoha. I believe that gathering the first 4 should be much easier, but I am not so sure about Sharingan. For that reason I marked Hataki Kakashi with the puppet curse as he owns 1 Sharingan despite not being an Uchiha, but I am still not sure if that would work as there would definitely be people stopping him." After hearing Hirako's answer, Pain was silent for a few seconds and said, "I will consider your request, you can go back for now." Hirako wanted to add something, but looking at those indifferent and cold eyes, he tacitly chose to shut up and obediently left as per Lord Pain's order. After Hirako left, a spiraling whirl appeared in the void, and out came the masked Uchiha Madara from the whirl. A few seconds of silence later, he asked, "What do you think about his project?" Pain did not give any answer. His attitude clearly depicted that he was not much interested in this ritual whatsoever. For him, who has the Rinnegan, the eyes of Rikudo Sennin, Kekkei Genkai stealing plan is all but meaningless, and therefore, he doesn't have much interest in it. Madara crossed his arms over his chest and while leaning on the wall and spoke, "The most recent information I have received has confirmed that Amatsukami can no longer be ignored, as they are also targeting the 9 Bijou." Pain's gaze narrowed, a trace of coldness appeared. Madara seemed to have noticed this change, but he continued, "It is said that Konohagakure has proposed to hold the second Gakage summit to deal with mercenary organizations like Akatsuki, Amatsukami, and Nokizuru Group. At present, the 4 other villages seem to have accepted their proposal and are in discussions to decide the location where the Gakage summit will be held." Conan asked, "Can Amatsukami really pose a threat to us?" Madara said, "Suijin was able to go toe-to-toe with Sandaime Hokage, Homusubi was able to fight against Kumogakure's AB combo with some help from the third member who uses magnet release. Rumors say that this third member is even stronger than Suijin and Homusubi. There is no information proving whether that is true or not, but what other abilities he has are unknown for now, so it could be possible. Finally, there is that mysterious Yama, who we know nothing about other than his name and the disguise he wears, and we also don't have any information if there are other members in their organization. Overall, I don't believe that they pose a threat to us, but given that their goals are also the 9 Bijou, as such they will be a force we will have to deal with at some point in time, and I have a feeling that we will need more combat personnel with high power to deal with the upcoming future events." Pain pondered over those words a while and spoke, "If that is the case, then agree to Hiriko's request, and gather all the Kekii Genkai that he needs for his ritual." Conan nodded and walked out. "I will solve the problem of Sharingan." Leaving that sentence, Madara disappeared in the spiraling whirl. A few days later, the land of birds. The 4 shinobi wearing the traditional turtleneck cloak of Akatsuki were walking through the dense forest. Glancing at Hiriko next to him, Sasori, who was hiding in his Hiriko puppet armor, complained, "I really don't understand why Pain agreed to your absurd request and assigned all the members of the organization to kidnap so many shinobi with different Kekii Genkai." Hiriko was not bothered by Sasori's question and spoke, "Even the leader with the eyes of Rikudo Sennin must realize that my plan is very useful, therefore, he took my request seriously and agreed to help me with the power of the organization." Inferiority has always been hidden in Hiriko's heart. He has always wanted to prove himself and show that he too is no inferior to any legendary shinobi, but his mediocre talent has always gotten in his way, which has caused him to be ignored time and time again. When he was in Konoha, Hiriko did all he could to prove himself that he was not inferior to the Sannin, but the difference between the Sannin and him was too wide, and that difference kept becoming bigger and bigger as time passed. Unwilling to accept this reality, and anger at himself for not being good enough, Hiriko broke through all moral shackles and dealt himself into the study of the human body, and carried out many crazy and cruel human experiments. The Chimera technique is the culmination of his hard work, and the fact that the leader of Akatsuki chose to support his Kekii Genkai stealing plan deeply moved Hiriko's heart and made him very happy. Hiriko's greatest desire is not strength, but recognition, and the fact that Pain, who is Rinnegan, the eye of Rikudo Sennin, supports his plan, which in itself is akin to recognition, and this also made him feel a sense of belonging with the Akatsuki. Sasori snorted disdainfully after hearing Hiriko's words. Hiriko did not care about Sasori's tsundere attitude and spoke with a grin, "Sasori, I have to tell you that your choice of giving up your physical body is wrong." Sasori stopped and stared at Hiriko with a murderous look, his eyes carrying the killing intent that he would kill Hiriko any moment and make him into a puppet. "Ignorant guy. Do you think you have the qualification to challenge my art?" In the previous battle against Sandaime Hokage, Sasori lost an arm, which motivated him to finally give up the useless human body and completely turn his body into a puppet. Hiriko chose to ignore the term qualification and said, "You don't need to get so angry over a small suggestion, facts will prove everything to you." Sasori said coldly, "When you have completed your so-called plan, I will teach you in person about my puppetry." Unlike Sasori and Hiriko, who were having a constant conflict, Shino and Kakuzu, who were at the front, were mostly silent with occasional few words. At this time, Shino smiled and spoke, "The task this time will really be troublesome for Kakuzu-san. I just hope that it will not delay Kakuzu-san's personal matters for too long." Everyone in the Akatsuki knows Kakuzu's love of money, and they all understand this full well, that as long as there is some free time between the assigned tasks, Kakuzu will most definitely go to the black market to take bounty tasks and earn more money. Therefore, Kakuzu is generally a very busy person. Kakuzu said with a gloomy expression, "Not only the Land of Fire, but even the other countries are persecuting and suppressing the black market circle, as such no decent tasks are available in the black market." Shino spoke with a frowning expression, "Amatsukami's actions have caused much more damage for people like us, haven't they?" With his experience, Shino is also quite clear with the pattern of the shinobi world. As far as he understands, the Akatsuki organization that he is part of is an extremely powerful secret organization in the world, and no matter which shinobi village, Akatsuki is fully capable of destroying them and subverting the pattern of the shinobi world. And the fact that Amatsukami, which popped out of nowhere, also seems to have a similar level of strength as Akatsuki, and has already started to pose such a great threat to the 5 great villages, really makes Shino feel very surprised. After a moment of consideration, Shino asked, Shinichi is also from the Uchiha clan, shouldn't he be aware of the real identity of Homusubi? Kakuzu shook his head. The last time I met him, I asked Shinichi if he is aware of who Homusubi could be. All he said was I don't have even the slightest of the clue of who Homusubi is, and how he popped out of thin air. And based on his expression, I can judge that he wasn't lying about it. Shino also muttered with a thoughtful expression, firstly, ice release user who could go toe-to-toe with Sandaime Hokage, then an unknown missing Uchiha with Manjikyu Sharingan who can fight against Kumogakure's AB combo, then there is magnet release user, and then there is mysterious leader, Yama. Such strength is more than enough to completely destroy a small shinobi village within minutes if anything. Even I am unable to understand how they are appearing out of thin air. Kakuzu grunted in anger, ever since I fought with Amatsukami, my source of fortune has been cut off. On our next battle, I have to make sure that I take their hearts to make up for my losses. After this, some small discussions continued, and soon, the 4 people arrived at a fork in the road. One path leading to the land of bears, and the other, towards the land of earth. Looking at the 2 different paths before him, Hirako said, from here, let's split up. I and Shino will go to the land of bear to deal with the shinobi with the dark release Kekii Genkai, while your duo will bring the steel release user from the land of earth. Sasori did not reply to Hirako, just started to walk towards the land of earth together with Kakuzu to bring the steel release user as fast as possible and be done with it. As Sasori and Kakuzu disappeared on the path, Hirako and Shino nodded towards each other and moved towards the land of bear. Somewhere near the land of whirlpools. Boom. With a loud muffled noise of colliding with wood, Uchiha Shinichi was violently knocked several trees along the path and finally stopped the fall. But before he could calm down, a high-speed after-image flickered through the cover of smoke and dust and disappeared instantly, and just a moment later a fast kunai pierced through his heart. It was at this moment that Biwa Juzo arrived with his Kubikuri Bocho, and waved it fiercely, slashing across the incoming path of the after-image with his trusty sword. Ding! The sword that the after-image carried with him collided with Kubikuri Bocho, and for a moment several ear-piercing sounds of metal collision resounded through the forest when suddenly there was a loud explosion. After temporarily repelling the afterimage, Biwa Juzo watched his surroundings vigilantly and retreated near Shinichi, who has already recovered from the injury just a few moments ago. Are you okay? Puke Shinichi vomited out the blood stuck in his throat, and asked Juzo with an annoyed tone, Answer me Juzo, just why in the hell are we fighting this guy? Biwa Juzo said, Obviously because this is the leader's order, you can't complain about it. But wasn't he supposed to be controlled by some sort of puppet curse? Then why in the hell is he not? His speed is too fast, I reckon that only Yondaime Reikage would be able to match such speed. Shinichi paused here and wiped away the blood from the corners of his mouth and continued, Even if I can keep track of him with my Manjikyu Sharingan, what's the point if I can't even keep up with that freakish speed? Juzo also thought about what Shinichi said. Based on the information they were given at the time they were issued with the task, it was stated that the target would be under the control of a puppet curse, and their job was to only safely bring him to the target destination, but that's not happening here. Well, for now, we can't figure out the reason why the puppet curse that was supposed to work is not working. We have to deal with him regardless of any issues. Remember the detail we have, he is a shinobi with swift release Kekii Genkai, and the fact that he has those light red hair must mean that he has Uzumaki blood in his body. Shinichi nodded, but he was more confused. But wasn't the Uzumaki clan annihilated by the 4 villages even before the Second Shinobi War began? Juzo sighed. It's true that Uzumaki clan was annihilated, but some members of this clan still exist in the shinobi world. Shinichi muttered with a sullen look, swift release coupled with Uzumaki physique and large chakra reserve. This guy is not only extremely fast but is also very apt in taijutsu to complement his Kekii Genkai. It's going to be a pain in the ass to capture this guy alive. Biwa Juzo nodded and gave Shinichi a serious glance. Right, so it's about time you start taking this seriously. If we don't catch him, it will be difficult to explain this to the leader. You can't be lazy here unlike all the time. Shinichi, who was reprimanded by Juzo, grinned slightly. So you have been noticing my laziness all the time, huh? Juzo sighed. I don't understand why you don't take anything related to Akatsuki seriously. but since you have decided to join the organization, you should at least perform the mission regardless of whatever other things you have in mind. I don't care what you do in your free time, but it's about time you start taking things a bit seriously, otherwise, I won't have anything to explain to leader. Having been seen through by Juzo, Shinichi sighed. He knows that although Juzo tries to be an indifferent and cruel person from the outside, in reality, Juzo is quite the opposite. For this reason, Shinichi has always teased Juzo, saying that he is nothing like a brutal or ruthless person as most of the missing mean. Therefore, Shinichi also understands that this time Juzo reprimanded him, it is purely out of goodwill, as such decided to put away his lazy look for a while and take this mission seriously. Okay, I will complete this mission earnestly. Seeing that Shinichi finally decided to be somewhat serious, Juzo stopped talking nonsense and asked directly, so, what's the plan? While observing his surroundings carefully with his Manjikyu Sharingan, Shinichi said, let's try going with Plan 33A, we came up with it a few days ago, it should work perfectly in this situation. Juzo nodded in agreement. While the two were busy planning their next move, the swift release user saw this as an opportunity, and immediately went for an attack. Using the fastest speed he could reach, he rushed towards Biwa Juzo and stabbed through his throat fiercely. Almost at the same instant, Shinichi, who was already prepared, completed the hand signs and shouted, Fire Release, Fireball Jutsu. Prompted by his chakra, a billowing hot stream of fire gushed out of Shinichi's mouth and rushed towards the incoming enemy. The swift release user didn't expect Shinichi to suddenly use Fire Release Jutsu at such a perfect opportunity, and he knew that if he insisted on continuing the attack towards Juzo, then he would be burned to crisp. So, he immediately changed his movement trajectory to the right and dodged the incoming fire. Suddenly, Juzo, who was standing near Shinichi, turned into water, and at the same time, another Juzo appeared on a tree opposite the fire and shouted, Water Release, Great Waterfall Jutsu. The huge streams of water and fire collided together, and in an instant, the entire forest was covered in mist. Juzo continued to print the head seals, and shouted Ninja Art, hiding in the mist jutsu. Instantly, the pre-existing mist grew thicker, blocking all the visual acuity. But there lied the advantage. They have already confirmed that the swift release user is not a sensor nin, as such he will no longer be able to discern the direction he will be going, nor will he be able to locate his targets. While Shinichi can see through the cover of mist with his Manjikyu Sharingan. Although Juzo will have some trouble normally, he will still be able to discern the directions the enemy is moving in thanks to the chakra disruption in the mist, giving feedback to Juzo. Moreover, Juzo can also use silent killing, so there will be no sound from his movements. Overall, this situation will be a complete advantage for Shinichi and Juzo's duo. And the swift release user seems to have realized that he was in a tough spot for now and tried to escape out of the forest. Wherever he moved, he left behind a trail, which was easily noticed by Shinichi, and easily sensed by Juzo. The moment Shinichi captured the enemy's movement trajectory, he suddenly flickered from his position and appeared at the spot where the enemy will be appearing in a second. The swift release user had to attempt a change of direction at this instant, but the moment he tried to turn away, a silent sword cut through the cover of mist and arrived towards him. The swift release user had to immediately use the sword in his hand to block that attack, but that short moment of pause was more than enough of an opportunity. Shinichi needed to disrupt his chakra flow, successfully putting him in a genjutsu with mirror contact. As soon as the enemy showed a momentary sluggishness, Juzo successfully knocked him out, and immediately injected the special drug inside the body of the captive. This drug would put him in an unconscious state until its antidote is injected into his body. After confirming that the captive was in an unconscious state, Juzo sighed in relief and said to Shinichi, Manjikyu Sharingan's genjutsu is really useful in such battles. Shinichi didn't care, Manjikyu Sharingan is nothing more than a tool for him now, and he really doesn't care anymore, so long as it keeps working then that's all that matters. Now that he has been captured, let's return to the Land of Rain and deliver this guy to Hirako for whatever reason he needs him for. Juzo nodded, and after tying the captive limbs with chakra sealing tags, he passed him over to Shinichi, who held him over his shoulder, and both started moving towards the Land of Rain. Somewhere around the border of the Land of Fire and the Land of Hot Water, a spiraling whirl suddenly appeared in the void, and out came a masked man wearing a black cloak over his body. After taking a casual look around him, he jumped over a tree, as if waiting for something. At this time, Zetsu's body rose up from the tree bark and informed the masked man, our spy in Kumogakure has given information and confirmed the location where the second Gakage summit is going to be held. The Kages have agreed to assemble at the Hozuki Castle in the Land of Grass. The masked man was surprised. Hozuki Castle? Why there? Zetsu said, none of the 5 great shinobi villages trust each other, and they have been at a stalemate with each other. so finally they decided to meet at Hozuki Castle, which is located at a fair amount of distance from all 5 of the villages. The masked man nodded and asked again after thinking a little, "Have you confirmed Kumogikure's candidates who will be attending the meeting?" Zetsu nodded. From Kumogikure, Reikage will obviously be attending the summit, but because Amatsukumi's targets are the 9 Bijou, so he has decided to not take either of the Jinchuriki with him, as such 2 Jonin will be following him. One is the shinobi, who was the vice-captain of the peace delegation that went to Konoha, while the other one is a user of storm release Kekii Genkai. As soon as he heard this, the masked man smiled. Very good. One of the Kekii Genkai that Hirako needs for his ritual is storm release. Although there are many users of storm release, most of them are concentrated in Kumogikure. As such, if Akatsuki plans to catch a storm release user, then they will have to attack Kumogikure. Although there is no problem with it, it is still hassling. And now that the masked man has the information that a storm release user will be going to the Hozuki Castle as the Reikage's guard, so it is obviously best to capture him. This will be much easier than sneaking into Kumogikure and fighting and whatnot. Not letting this opportunity go away, Masked Man took out 2 black cloaks with some golden pattern sewn on them, wore one of them upon him, and passed over the other to Zetsu. Put on this cloak and cover your face with those leaves. After you are ready, you will be the bait and lead the Reikage away from his 2 guards. Zetsu, who received the black cloak from the masked man, observed it for a while. He was able to notice that this cloak was very similar to the disguising cloak that the members of Amatsukumi wear. As such, Zetsu can't help but be surprised. You want us to pretend to be members of Amatsukumi, so as to put the blame of the missing ninja upon Amatsukumi's head? The masked man nodded. Since now he has been unable to find any useful information about Amatsukumi, therefore, he has to be extremely vigilant when dealing with them. Initially, he did not care too much about Amatsukumi's goals as long as they don't interfere with his project Tsuki no Mi, but now that Amatsukumi has officially declared that they will start targeting the 9 Bijou, so Masked Man can no longer ignore their presence. At this moment Akatsuki has not started to collect the Bijou and is still in the initial phase of gathering excellent shinobi under their command who can contend with Bijou, so the Masked Man is unwilling to fight Amatsukumi head-on for now, but at the same time, he can no longer sit back and watch Amatsukumi growing stronger. Therefore, this second Gakage summit is another opportunity for him to indirectly target Amatsukumi. When the blame of the missing shinobi from all the villages is put on Amatsukumi, then Amatsukumi would have made an enemy out of all the shinobi villages, and all of them will unanimously point their fingers and weapons towards Amatsukumi and do all they can to eradicate this organization. And when that happens, Amatsukumi's threat will either be completely eliminated or will be lowered down so that the masked man will no longer have to worry about them. As such, putting the blame on Amatsukumi's head is extremely necessary for the Kages to direct their fingers towards Amatsukumi, and using this disguise is the best option to achieve that objective. Zetsu understood the masked man's approach and complied. With both of them disguised as the member of Amatsukumi, Zetsu led them towards their goal, and the 2 soon discovered Reikage and his 2 guards rushing towards the land of grass for the Gakage summit. Looking at the Reikage and his entourage moving towards the land of grass, Masked Man signaled Zetsu, "Go." Zetsu, who was dressed as an unknown member of Amatsukumi, retracted into the ground. POV change. Yondaime Reikage and his 2 guards were moving towards the land of grass. Then suddenly one of his subordinates stopped and whispered while pointing in a certain direction, "Reikage-sama, look there. From the type of clothes he is wearing he seems to be a member of Amatsukumi going somewhere." I narrowed his eyes as soon as he heard those words, and looking in that direction, he was indeed surprised because from the disguise, which included the black cloak printed with some strange golden pattern and that green leafy structure over his head, whether he is a person or plant. Whichever he may be, but he seems to be a member of Amatsukumi. What's more, that person doesn't seem to have noticed these 3 as if he was busy in some thoughts. Rai, the storm release user, said, "Do you think he is a member of Amatsukumi?" Blue lightning started to flicker around the Reikage as he said, "We will find out when I break his hands and legs." Whoosh. Leaving that sentence, he suddenly disappeared from his position and ran in the direction of the suspected Amatsukumi member. The suspected member of Amatsukumi suddenly noticed something coming towards him and his expression shrank, and he fled into the distance immediately using his unique technique. The Reikage, who was coming towards the suspected member of Amatsukumi, narrowed his eyes. He immediately understood that the person is indeed a member of Amatsukumi, as such he must not be allowed to escape, so he urged the lightning chakra around him more violently, increasing his speed several times, and shouted, "You bastard, don't think that you will manage to get away this time." Seeing that Reikage-sama disappearing so fast, Rai shouted hurriedly, "Reikage-sama, please wait, it could be a trap." However, before Rai's voice could reach Raikage, he has already disappeared. Now Rai and the other Jonin looked at each other. The other Jonin asked with a frown, what to do now? Rai sighed and spoke with a helpless expression, what else can we do? Follow them, of course. I am afraid that it could be a trap designed by Amatsukami to attack Raikage-sama. Just as he spoke, a spiraling whirl appeared behind the two of them. Before the two of them could notice the sudden appearance of spiraling whirl, a hand stretched out of it, held Rai by the neck and dragged him inside the spiraling whirl. If you want to support me, check out my Patreon at https://www.patreon.com/Kaioshin. I tend to polls that decide important plot stuff in my P at Trian. Many thanks to my awesome patrons. Ben Phillips, Yami Tancho, Kenny Nielsen, Harold Martinsons. If you enjoyed the content, don't forget to give it a like and subscribe to the channel. I'll be here until next time.